I'm Dr. Lisa Colledge. Welcome to Culture by Neurodesign. Today I'm going to focus on one of the most critical challenges of modern leadership. It's resilience. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of resilience that gets you through a bad quarter or through the kind of PR disaster that results from an ill-considered comment relating to Black Lives Matter, as I discussed in episode 10. I'm talking about long-term organizational resilience, the ability to adapt, evolve, and even when you didn't anticipate a change, come out stronger. Today, I want to share some recent eye-opening, actually eye-watering research about how leaders see the increasing unpredictability of the world they operate in, yet still feel extremely underprepared. I'll, of course, also consider the benefits of prioritizing a cognitively inclusive culture which provides psychological safety, teamwork, and connectedness, not as nice to haves, but as fundamental to organizational resilience. But first, let's be clear, doing nothing isn't an option, at least not if you want to keep thriving as a company anyway. Uncertainty is increasing. A recent survey of over 250 global leaders found that 84% of companies feel unprepared for future disruptions, and 90% admit that they lack the resilience capabilities they need to navigate what's coming. So which disruptors is it that these leaders worry about facing? The top 10 are listed in a report from the World Economic Forum in collaboration with McKinsey. I won't list all of them, but they include technology disruptions such as AI and cybersecurity threats, regulatory changes such as data privacy and climate regulations, economic instability like inflation and global financial volatility, market shifts such as changing consumer preferences and breakdowns in supply chains, and talent shortages, changing workforce expectations, especially driven by Gen Z, skill gaps, especially in relation to AI, and challenges with retention. So these are all really complex problems, and they're all interconnected, and it's forming this kind of web of disruption that no company is going to be able to ignore. The report identifies a common mistake that companies make in focusing on managing risks instead of building adaptability. They're bracing for impact. They're expecting to be bruised and battered instead of shaping their future, instead of using the disruption as an opportunity. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How organizations can stop reacting and start leading, even in this incredibly disruptive environment. Now, the research I mentioned earlier found that most organizations do recognize that resilience is important, but the research shows that a lot of resilience strategies are short-term, they're reactive. Only 20% of organizations prioritize strategic reorientation. 18%, 1/8, focus on foresight, and just 22% emphasize preparation. That means that the vast majority of companies are stuck in defensive mode, is dealing with problems as they happen instead of preparing for what's ahead. It's just damage control. Now think about the recent disruptions, massive data breaches, AI causing companies to adjust their workforce strategies, retail and healthcare still struggling with post-pandemic disruptions. If you wait for the crisis to respond, you're already later than you want to be. The most resilient companies aren't just strong, they're adaptive. They plan for disruption before it happens, and they know they'll come out stronger. One company showcases doing this really well is IKEA. IKEA embeds sustainability and resource management into their strategic vision. They're not add-ons, they're integral to IKEA's success. Circularity, or reusing and repurposing materials, that's a core part of IKEA's resilience strategy. They don't need to react to supply chain disruptions or environmental regulations. Instead, they've had the foresight to build resilience into their operations and into their investments. Yes, this is damage control and risk management, but in being proactive, they're turning a potential long-term headache into a competitive advantage. And this is the kind of thinking that makes organizations resilient. It's thriving, not just surviving. And this requires a structured approach to resilience, a proactive framework, so an organization isn't just reacting to crises. I found a really useful framework that's been developed by the World Economic Forum with McKinsey. It's called the Private Sector Resilience Framework. Let me describe it briefly. The Private Sector Resilience Framework identifies 6 key resilience dimensions: financial, operational, digital and technology, market position, societal alignment, and organizational. And to address these, companies need 4 core resilience capabilities. Crisis response, that's about managing immediate shocks. Strategic reorientation, which is about pivoting in the face of disruption. Foresight, anticipating risks, and preparation, which is about long-term resilience building. Now, the huge problem is that research shows that most companies focus on short-term resilience but remain vulnerable to long-term shifts. True resilience means integrating these capabilities into your organizational culture so people live and breathe them, become familiar with them, comfortable with them, confident about using them, and they don't only have to learn them when crisis hits. Now let's talk about leadership, because this is where real resilience has to start. Research consistently shows that resilient companies invest in a kind of leadership factory. They develop adaptive leaders at all levels. But here's the problem. Many leaders do still operate under outdated models of leadership. They think resilience is about stability when it's actually about agility. They see uncertainty as something they should avoid instead of something to embrace. They believe that strong leadership means having all the answers instead of empowering teams to innovate. Now, especially that last point, empowering teams to innovate, is why I talk so much about innovation and resilience as a natural couple. The capabilities that an organization needs to be resilient, with an eye on the long term and external disruptors, are the same that it needs to be innovative, where the focus is shorter term and often strategically driven. But if the organization has the skills and the culture to empower, then it doesn't matter whether the need to change comes from strategy or from disruptor. The outcome will be successful. I'll come back to talk about that a bit more, but let me get back to the research. So McKinsey's research on 21st century leadership outlines a successful approach to leaders, which, if you've engaged with some of my content on cognitive diversity and innovation, will sound familiar. Key elements that the research calls out are to prioritize learning and adaptability over rigid expertise, to engage teams with clarity and purpose while staying flexible, and to build psychological safety so employees feel empowered to experiment. Now, it's easy to see when we think about these foundations of modern leadership why the leadership approach of thinking you need to know all the answers yourself just doesn't work anymore. If that's your approach, when you face disruption, you're in trouble, because nobody was empowered to adapt. And even if they had great ideas, they're extremely unlikely to share them, given the typical responses of that style of leadership. Compare that to a team where leadership encourages learning and collaboration. It provides their team members with the training to connect with people whose styles are probably different from theirs and whom they naturally resist. Companies with this kind of leadership are ready to roll when they're faced with disruption, because they do what they do every day, what they're comfortable and confident doing. These companies aren't just managing a crisis, they're shaping their culture. Now let's talk about a foundation factor in resilience that's often ignored. That's psychological safety. Research shows that this is a multiplier in how effective organizations are at innovating, even for those organizations that do consider themselves adaptable or resilient, when they become 3 times more effective. And if you add in strong organizational support, that jumps to a 6-fold boost in innovation. This is what you'd expect. The psychological safety isn't just about making people feel comfortable. It's about creating an environment where employees can challenge ideas, they can admit mistakes, they can take risks without fear of punishment. They can experiment, iterate, they can push boundaries without being afraid. And that's all behavior that you need if you want your teams and organization to be innovative, to be resilient. High levels of psychological safety alone result in a 3.9 times increase in innovative behavior. So this describes an organization where people feel safe to raise concerns, and these organizations are far more likely to spot risks early and adapt quickly. On the other hand, imagine a working environment where employees are afraid to speak up. Most of us probably have experience with this, unfortunately. When disruption hits, no one dares to challenge bad decisions, and leadership can get stuck in an echo chamber. And this is what happened at Polaroid when it faced a disruptor of digital photography. And you could listen to that case study in episode 12 of this podcast. A psychological safety is a feeling, but it is measured in a quantitative way by asking people to rate the extent to which they agree with statements like, it's safe to take a risk on my team, or members of my team are able to bring up problems and tough issues. Now, another common question is, working with members of my team, my unique skills and talents are valued and utilized. And this last statement, actually, which people need to rate, this last statement perfectly illustrates why building a cognitively inclusive culture is a great program to invest in that covers all, not 1, 2, 3, but all of the capabilities an organization needs to be resilient. And it can apply this behavior then to all of the dimensions, all of the 6 dimensions, and it needs to. Now, let me talk about this briefly here, although for more on this, please listen to episode 19 of this podcast. The kind of resilience that you want to be like IKEA and to stay ahead of change and turn disruption into competitive advantage, that kind of resilience is proactive. One of the most under-recognized and underutilized enablers of resilience is cognitive diversity. Now, each of us has a particular cognitive style. Some of us are really good at pattern recognition. Some of us are very structured. Some of us are great at motivating people to achieve a common goal. These are innate, hardwired strengths. They're hardwired because creativity, evaluation, the ability to convert ideas into values, they've been essential for human survival. And we are specialized naturally as humanity to adapt to different environments. We're specialized to adapt. But in modern workplaces, we often suppress this natural strength of our teams and create a uniform style of thinking, perhaps unintentionally, but we do it nevertheless. So perhaps you or your organization has a particular idea of what a good leader looks like. This is going to make your organization very uniform, and it's exactly what you don't want if you want to be resilient. And research shows that teams with high cognitive diversity, different styles of thinking, are more adaptable. They can pivot and problem solve in rapidly changing environments, so resilient in other words, and they're more engaged. Team members feel valued for their unique strengths. This is about retention. By the way, one of the big headaches that leaders listed in their top 10 headache areas that we mentioned earlier. Cognitive diversity is the enabler, but it's not enough to get the benefit. Someone who has a lot of ideas is not a natural collaborator of somebody who likes to structurally execute a plan. So people with different cognitive styles, different ways of using information, they need to learn to work together. They need to be recognized when they build skills to work together. And that is a cognitively inclusive culture. So as I said, episode 19, if you'd like to hear more about this. And at the end of the podcast, I'll share details about a free resource that will help you to learn more and start experimenting with cognitive inclusion as a resilience strategy without you needing to wait for leadership approval or major structural changes. But to bring this back now to the private sector resilience framework, remember the 4 core resilience capabilities I mentioned: crisis response, It's about handling immediate disruptions, strategic reorientation, adjusting to long-term shifts, foresight, anticipating and planning for change, and preparation or embedding resilience into daily operations. Now, a cognitively diverse, cognitively inclusive workplace activates all 4 capabilities. And this is what I advocate prioritizing. It's one program that will address resilience in both the long and short term, and it will also take care of any engagement and talent challenges you're experiencing. So this makes cognitive inclusion one of the most powerful strategic initiatives that you can invest in to future-proof your success. Let me come now to actionable steps. Thinking about resilience not just as a way to survive short-term disruptions, but about long-term adaptability and competitive advantage. Thinking about resilience in that way, we need a structured approach. Now, we've already seen that cognitive inclusion addresses all 4 resilience capabilities, so you can apply this to any or all of the 6 dimensions you need to be considering: operations, financial, and so on. Let's think about some actionable steps. Now, first step, shift your mindset from risk management adaptation strategy. Research shows that most companies focus on financial and operational resilience, like tightening budgets and ensuring compliance, but we want to invest in your ability to prepare for future disruptions, not just react to them. And the way to do this is to embed resilience in your daily activities. Build flexible, innovation-ready mindsets in your teams, and to make your workplace culture all about the diversity of contributions, not one style of leadership, diversity of contributions. Right now, only 18% of companies prioritize foresight. So the ones that do and can flip the script are going to be the ones that are leading when disruption hits. So that was the first practical step, shifting from risk management to adaptation strategy. The second one is developing leaders who are comfortable in uncertainty, who actually thrive in uncertain conditions. So this is about adaptable leaders, not tough leaders. It's about making sure the organization as a whole is adaptable as well. Leaders aren't in this on their own. So remember that companies that invest in psychological safety, strategic thinking, and agility in leadership are loads better at navigating disruption. So I read interesting research, as I mentioned, recommending building a leadership factory where leadership isn't just top down, but developed at all levels. It's not about 1 or 2 leaders, but about creating a whole system of leadership throughout the organization. It's about development programs that focus on resilience, adaptability, and cognitive diversity. And it's about rewarding curiosity, rewarding experimentation and strategic risk-taking, not just about efficiency and execution. McKinsey's research shows that leaders who champion collaboration and cognitive diversity perform 4.2 times better in long-term resilience than companies that don't. Resilience isn't just about having a plan, right? It's about having a team that can execute it under pressure. So that was a second area, developing leaders who are comfortable in uncertainty, who thrive in uncertainty. And the third area is about embedding cognitive inclusion to future-proof your organization. Leverage your cognitive diversity, which is different ways of thinking, different ways of processing information and solving problems, and build a cognitively inclusive culture to ensure that people with diverse ways of thinking actually connect and thrive. And research shows that teams with high cognitive diversity and psychological safety experience a 3-time increase in innovation. And if you add in strong organizational support, that's a cognitively inclusive workplace, that jumps to 6 times. The best part is that cognitive inclusion benefits both short-term and long-term resilience. It makes teams stronger in a crisis, and you're always ready to adapt. It's one of the most practical, one of the most scalable ways to embed the private sector resilience framework into your organization. Now, I promised that at the end of this podcast, I would share details of a free resource that will help you to learn more about cognitive inclusion as a resilience strategy. This resource is educational, but it's also structured and practical. And each month you'll receive a step that you can try out in your team so you can experience the relevance of this approach to your situation and start to see the impacts. The program's called Neuro-Inspired 12 Steps to a Future-Proof Workplace Culture. As I say, it's free and there are options for support if you want it at each step. I'll include the link in the details accompanying this podcast episode, and it's easy to find on my website. Or if you're in the mood for more listening, you can listen to episode 18 of this podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a colleague who you think will be interested. Thank you for listening to Culture by Neurodesign.